having the entire verse played on one manual. It takes some practice to do this. I encourage you to practice your hymns every week. Don't just say, well, I've played this hymn many times. That's where we lose the freshness. We lose that inspiration that we're trying to bring to worship. We want to be able to let the people know that we've put our preparation time into this and then allowed God's inspiration to move us in such a way that each hymn is very special and each hymn has its meaning within the service of worship. So let's try our approach and use that solo on the melody of one of the verses of this hymn. When you're playing hymns, whether you're playing them on one manual or two manuals, we find that the bass part is played by the pedal. The interior parts, namely the alto and the tenor, are played by the left hand, and the right hand plays the melody. And if you learn your hymns like that, it's very easy then to take the right hand and solo out a verse or two. Now, what is the reason that we don't want to play the bass in the left hand? Well, first of all, it's unnecessary because the pedal's playing that part. And secondly, if you're playing the bass with the left hand, when you go to solo out a melody with the right hand, you're used to having that left hand playing three parts instead of two. So it makes much better sense to always keep the bass in the pedal and then allow the left hand simply to play the alto and the tenor. What if you're blessed with some powerful reed stops on your organ, or even if you have a great trumpet that has some pizzazz to it? It's awfully nice to be able to use this effect on a somewhat more majestic hymn, a hymn which calls out for a little grander sound from the organ. Let's hear what that sounds like on our particular registration. That's certainly a very majestic quality which the 8-foot tuba in this case is adding to that sound. The phrasing of hymns is so very important. Organists are frequently criticized because we don't always breathe. We don't have to. We can keep this sound going forever. We're not playing a flute. We're not playing a wind instrument that needs to be blown by an individual. We play a wind instrument that has its own source of wind. And sometimes this leads us to keep the sound going. And I want to show you the difference between the effects of phrasing and not phrasing. Let me give you the bad example first. Do you hear how bad that sounds? I hope it sounds bad to you, because it doesn't reflect any breath. Now, sometimes you hear organists do the opposite. The poor excuse for doing that is that, well, it helps to lead the congregation a lot better. I don't believe that for a minute. It simply makes the organ sound very bad, and it sounds very juvenile to me to hear music played like that. Let's do the good version. Church music has changed over the past 10 years in an enormous way. We're called upon to play many, many hymns and songs and worship and praise music, which isn't necessarily organistic in nature. I think it's a time when churches are experimenting, trying to find almost an identity. And to be rather blunt about it, this is creating havoc for so many of us who grew up thinking that we'd be playing a certain style of music for a certain style of church. And suddenly we find that we're doing something totally different and we're out of our element. We find ourselves playing music that we sort of turn our nose up to. And you know, I think it's something that we've got to come to terms with. Perhaps the compromise is this. Perhaps we put an enormous amount of effort into making the worship songs and the praise songs sound as beautiful as they can on the organ, and the people will then also appreciate what we do with the more traditional music and the music that we feel is best for leading the congregation. Part of the problem has been the selection of music and the selection of the style of worship has in many ways been hijacked from us. Years ago, no one really questioned what anthem selections we would use or the hymn choices, even though the minister might be choosing some of the hymns or all of the hymns. They came from a hymnal that we were very familiar with, and so everything was in place. We simply added our organ voluntaries to the service and chose the service music, and we had something that made sense. And today, we have a tremendous amount of consternation within the worship service. We almost are trying to be all things to all people, trying to bring the children into worship as best we can, trying to appease those that might be going to a church that has drums and guitars and more percussive instruments. We're trying to keep them in our church by the use of music which might appeal to them more. And we're trying to make a relevancy of the worship service, trying to make it almost worldly in effect, and taking out the sacred nature that it's had for so long. But my belief is that much of this is cyclical. We saw a lot of this back in the 1960s when guitars became so prevalent in worship. And that didn't last a whole long time. Suddenly we found ourselves back with a desire for music of a more traditional nature. And I feel that will return again. But we've got to hold our ground on the one hand, but be flexible on the other. We've got to be understanding that just like with symphony orchestras, no one grows up knowing the great pieces by Stravinsky, or maybe the Brahms 4 symphonies, or even the Mozart piano concerti. People aren't necessarily born loving organ music. So it's our responsibility to teach them, to uplift them, and to allow them to be able to appreciate what we have come to appreciate. It's like a fine wine. When you give an excellent glass of wine to someone that's having their very first sip, they might not like it. In fact, they might spit it out because they haven't even experienced wine of any kind. It's the same with the music that we want to show our congregations. They might spit it out at first. They might not appreciate its value at first. But if we, through our gentle education, through our being able to stand firmly, for our ability to teach them how this music can really minister to them, that way allows us to fulfill our mission and to allow the congregation to be uplifted at the same time.